The data fields of a class can be a reference type as well. For example, here is a student class where we have 4 data fields: a string type name, an integer type age, a boolean type is science major, and a character type gender. Here the type of name is string, and string is a reference value. So if a data field of a reference type does not reference any object, the data field holds a special literal value called null. Null means it actually points to nothing. So in the data field, when a type is declared as a data field of a class, that type has some default values. So the default value of a data field is null for any reference type, 0 for any numeric type like integer, short, double, float, the default value is 0. For boolean type, the default value is false, and for character type, the default value is null character. But we need to keep in mind that when the types are used for a local variable inside a method, there are no default value. The default values are assigned only when the data fields or when the variables are data fields of a class. So for example, if we inside our main method we just create a student with all the default values because we are not passing any parameter, then if we want to print those data fields, for example here name then plus student dot name, the default will be print as null. So as a null, we will see in our console that it will not print anything. That will be an empty line. Then age, student dot age, since age was an integer parameter here, integer parameter, so it will print 0. Then is science major, student dot is science major, the default will be printed false. And gender, student dot gender, the default will be printed the null character. Again, the null character is simply an empty space. We will see nothing on our screen. So we have seen that Java assigns no default value to a local variable inside a method. So here, in this example, all these name, age, is science major, gender, they were actually data field of a class. That's why they had a default value. But in this example, inside our main method, we are declaring two variables, int x and string y. We must keep in mind that these x and y are local variables for our main method, and that's why they will not have any default value. They will simply have garbage value or empty. So if you need to print like this, x is then the value of x or y is the value of y, this will create compilation error, and the errors will be variables not initialized. So the difference between variables of primitive data type and object type is the same what we have seen in array, because array is also a reference type. So why we call some types primitive type? So in primitive type, when we assign like this, int I equal 1, inside our memory, some specific memory location will be addressed as I. That means that particular address will be stored in the address table as I, and in that particular address we will have our value 1, directly the value 1. But when we have an object type like this, circle C, this C, the memory location C, will not hold the object itself. Rather, the actual object will be somewhere else. C will hold the reference or the address of that object. seen the difference between a variable of primitive type and reference type. Now let's look at how or when we copy variables of primitive type and reference type, what actually happens. So if we have two primitive type variables I and j, and initially the value of I is 1 and the value of j is 2, and we have this type of assignment statement I equal j, meaning the value of j will be assigned into I. So after this statement, the value of j, that means 2, will be assigned here in I, and now both I and j will hold the value 2 separately. Similarly, if we have two object references C1 and C2, that means C1 points to some particular circle somewhere else, C2 reference to or address to some other circle with radius 9, and then we have this assignment statement C1 equals C2. That means the value of C2 will be assigned into C1. That means the value of C2. What is value of C2? It's a memory location. That memory location will be copied in C1. When memory location is copied into C1, C1 then point to that same object as C2. So both the C1 and C2 now points to this particular object with radius 9. And the initial object with radius 5 is no longer accessible. And this memory is known as garbage. So we have seen a basic feature of Java was automatic garbage collection. Previous figure, after the assignment statement, this C1 equals C2, C1 now points to the same object referenced by C2, and the object that was previously referenced by C1 is no longer referenced. That means we have no reference to the C1 object, and that object is now known as garbage. In programming language like C++ or C, these type of garbage are not collected automatically. Programmer needs to free up those spaces separately. But in Java, this garbage is automatically collected by JVM. What does garbage collection mean? That means initially the memory location that was regarded as a filled up place, now they will be regarded as empty space and ready to hold something else. So if you know that an object is no longer needed, you as a programmer can also explicitly assign null to the reference variable for the object. And then JVM will automatically collect the space of that object if that is not referenced by any variable.